You wanted it, you got it. The Cold Steel 3 and 4 community ranking is here, and thank you to everyone who got involved. Much like the previous Erebonian arc ranking, the characters were judged based on 5 parameters that I believe are central to a good character, and they were also weighted accordingly. Those 5 categories were story significance rated from 1 to 20, dialogue rated from 1 to 15, character design rated from 1 to 10, character development rated from 1 to 30, and finally likability rated from 1 to 25. This would give a total of 100, which thus makes it fairly easy to compare the perceived quality of these characters against a flat scoreline. As a final note, because of these parameters, some notable characters from other arcs have been omitted, as their time to shine were in the likes of Sky and Crossbell. Let's start off with the bottom of the Graal. Oh, I am not sorry for that laugh. Some of you more frequent viewers will know that I do not care about Angelica at all, and this quote pretty much nails the reasoning why. I enjoy her casually, but in Cold Steel 3, when 95% of her dialogue ended in sexual innuendo, it ruined her otherwise fun disposition. She had some facepalm worthy moments in 1 and 2, but in 3 I felt like my hand might as well have been glued to my forehead. Now, some of my fellow Trails buds during brief discussion have said to me that they think Angelica was better in Cold Steel 3 and 4. I can't see it. Even though she has less screen time, she somehow manages to fit what feels like double the Angelica in those scenes. That sequence in Raquel was pretty much all I could stomach, and that was approximately 10 minutes into her return. Like I said in the Cold Steel 1 and 2 ranking, she had the makings of a good character, but she was far too overtuned for my liking. May seem harsh to some, but I completely agree with her being at the bottom. Now, unlike our previous entry, this one I was a little bit surprised with, though I can totally understand why she places here. Once again, one of you guys came through clutch with describing my exact feelings on Elise. I don't fully hate her, but let's just say that she's the biggest damn victim of Reen's harem tendencies. I do enjoy her interactions with Alfin and her growing in a support role, but Elise is one of the few Trails characters where the bad outweigh the good. It's a real shame because I thought the Schwarzer daughter was better in Cold Steel 3, she had clearly matured from the first half of the arc. She wasn't as gullible, she had a certain air of dignity to her, and she was the catalyst of one of my favourite quests in the game. You know which one. But come Cold Steel 4, all of that growth was just thrown aside and replaced with what many fans had grown tired of in the first 2 games. And when tainted memories are resurfaced, you're bound to incur the wrath of a fandom. Oh no. This one actually hurts, because Elliot was pretty much doomed to mediocrity as soon as he associated with Class 7. That being said, his seemingly more normal life was an important counterbalance in the original group. Not everyone is going to be running away from broken families or trying to assuage their demanding upbringing. It makes sense that some people in OG Class 7 have actual security in their lives. Unfortunately, JRPGs don't lend well to normality, and Elliot is no exception to that. No doubt he had his own struggles in the first half of Cold Steel trying to find his calling in the world of music, and come Cold Steel 3 and 4 he's made a real name for himself, which in of itself is admirable. His actual determination to pursue what he wanted is a real testament to how his character has grown, but like many in the original Class 7, he takes a backseat to the new frontrunners for Cold Steel 3 and 4, and sadly for Elliot, he wasn't exactly off to a strong start in the first place. Bring in the quote. He had such a strong build-up in the finale of Cold Steel 3 only to be a big baby throughout most of Cold Steel 4. Definitely a wasted opportunity. A shame because his character design and voice actor are pretty good. Nail on the head. I was actually intrigued by Black Albrecht in CS3. He seemed like an interesting villain considering how important he has been in not only Cold Steel but the wider Trails series as well. But come Cold Steel 4, all of that curiosity just faded away like Gilbert's self-confidence. It seemed that no matter what part of the game you ended up in, he was outsmarted. He would say a few evil things, follow it up with a proclamation of his superiority only to get his ass handed to him and then cry in a corner. But even his most compelling plot point in being the father of Elise falls flat as well because there's just no time given to establish their bond outside of the odd flashback. I feel that Black Albrecht just suffers from the massive cast present in Cold Steel 3 and 4, which, while I do enjoy from the interconnectivity perspective, inevitably was going to spawn some shortcomings here and there, most notably in individual character arcs. He just happened to be one of them. I was not a fan of him. Despite technically being the source of the conflict in the Cold Steel games, making him super significant to the plot, he could have been fleshed out some more. And of course his likability is abysmal, not even getting enough screen time to be a love-to-hate sort of villain. So I originally was not going to put Schmelker on the list, but you guys wanted it and thus here he is. For the record though, I actually do like the curse as a plot point. I realise that some people consider it to be a cop-out for all of the happenings in Cold Steel and the wider series to a point, and some see it as detracting from the Blood and Iron Chancellor himself, but I liked the idea that the land of Erebonia, which is feared among the rest of Zemuria, has a latent corruption within it that spurs its actions, and I also believe it tied in well to the story of the Divine Knights themselves, not to mention the overarching narrative. This point of corruption is something that has been very prominent in all of Trails up to this point, with the likes of the Oriel and Demiurgus, so it makes sense that the Great One, or at least a fragment of it, would also be corrupted by humanity. This is something that is likely going to continue as a theme as the Trails narrative progresses, but Falcom need to demonstrate to us varying ways in which these seemingly perfect treasures can be contaminated. It just so happens that Schmelker is driven by endless conflict. I understand why fans aren't a big supporter of the curse or its source in Schmelker, but I'm all on board with it. Now, disregarding the twist put in plain sight from his name alone, George is a character that I am indifferent with. There's no doubt that he is better than he was in Cold Steel 1 and 2, but that's not really saying much considering he had hardly anything to chew on from those games. It's clear that his time at Force influenced and subsequently diverted him away from what was his main objective. It changed him for the better and it did lead to a decent ending to his arc. This idea that he will now live to atone for his errors. I don't know what it was though, whether it's his clear lack of conviction or his plain design, but I could never take him seriously as a villain, and I think that detracted from my overall impression. Not a bad character by any stretch, but not great either. Now, unlike George, I will defend Toval to the ends of Gehenna and back. I think this guy is awesome and he was sadly underutilised in Cold Steel as a whole. This quote sums him up well. A cool bro, always nice to have him around. I did get a chuckle out of his interactions during the last mission. We have two of the greatest swordmasters in Erebonia, the Witch who was a big bad of Cold Steel 3 and former Anguis, well, she is still an Anguis, and then we have Toval who casts arts fast. And it's true, he's a very capable bracer in his own right, but he's also quite modest in his own ability. That's a great trait to have in a character. As ever though, much like Cold Steel 1 and 2, he was the dependable and experienced bracer that many characters would often turn to for help at certain points in the story. Whether it be assisting in the formation of the Round of 7 or discovering the ruins housing a holy beast. He was never going to score high in this ranking, but he's still one of my favourites in the series. Another character that gets shafted by the shift in focus away from OG Class 7, but that was always going to happen in order to illustrate his individual growth. From being somewhat obnoxious with some admittedly funny moments in Cold Steel's first half, he mellowed out a bit in Cold Steel 3 and 4. Sure, he's still a bit uptight as Crow says, but he's a pretty chill dude. Much like Elliot, Marcius's character arc pretty much concluded come the end of Cold Steel 2, and his prejudice against the nobility, which was an important dynamic in the first two games to demonstrate the barrier standing in front of Class 7 initially, has since mellowed out. And now, as said in the quotes, he's just a somewhat uptight but dependable friend of Reen and co, and there's nothing wrong with that. This is not a glow up, but I dare say some people want Cedric to grow up. The lesser-liked Prince of Erebonia had a shocking change of personality made all too apparent by his brash and forceful nature when he visits 4's branch campus. But despite how much of a pain he could be, I do think he was one of the better antagonists in Cold Steel 3 and 4. Cedric grew up frail and weak. He was mindful of the people around him who he believed doubted his ability as the future Emperor of Erebonia, a nation that prides itself on strength. His destiny to be its future ruler is an oxymoron in of itself. How can someone as weak as him lead one of the most powerful nations in Zemuria? And therein lies his insecurity, the core of why he acts the way he does. It's why he values strength and thus looks up to Osborne, who he sees as a bastion of leadership. Cedric, by all accounts, is putting up a facade during Cold Steel 3 and 4. He's arguably still as weak as he was when he was taken hostage by Duke Cayenne, and he feels that he needs to prove himself. That is an interesting path to take, and now that he has joined Ouroboros, I'm looking forward to seeing how Fal can continue his story. For the longest time, up till Cold Steel 4 at least, Campanella has just been there as an observer. He clearly doesn't seem to care about anything going on. All that matters to him is that he fulfills the role laid out to him by the Grand Master, and that devotion has made him unflappable for the longest time. So it was really cool to see Yuna really get under his skin. It's the first time that we've really seen Campanella snap as a character, and maybe that gives us a little glimpse into something deeper. Does Campanella serve the Grand Master through his own will, or is he forced to by some unseen power that we are not aware of yet? Campanella is arguably one of the fronts of the bigger mysteries within Trails, and I'm really enjoying witnessing the pieces slowly fall into place through his dialogue and actions. Okay, on to Shirley. Now, for those who watched the Crossbell ranking, you'll know that I don't really care much for this character, but I will admit that she was better in Cold Steel 3 and 4, mostly because of her dynamic with Cedric. One thing I did really like in Cold Steel 4 that redeemed her for me was when I first saw she was working with Cedric. I was thinking they wouldn't get along, but I was really wrong. They actually made a good team. Not much more to say, to be honest. She's pretty much the same old batshit insane walking asylum that she was the first time around. A bit older, maybe a little bit more mature as well, but you can't sand off what she really is. At number 36, we have the right-hand man of Einselnut herself. Thomas had a strong reveal come the end of Cold Steel 2, and it made us as players curious to see what he had in store for us a year and a half down the line. And while he was indeed important to the plot in terms of giving us background knowledge on the Septarians, I felt let down by Thomas. For a guy who was higher up in the food chain than any other Dominion we've seen thus far, I wanted to see far more. He just seemed like a guy who was there to prop up the actions of the other members of the cast. He was never meant to be more than a supporting role, and maybe that goes hand in hand with the non-intervention stance the Septian Church normally takes. Maybe further down the line, if we get a game or two focused more around Arteria, it might give him a bit more of the spotlight, but I feel his reception was lukewarm in Cold Steel. Despite his ranking here, I still really like Victor Arcade. This guy is a straight up badass, in every right, and that alone took him to fairly lofty heights in the Cold Steel 1 and 2 ranking. However, come the second half of the arc, it's clear he's fallen out of favour a bit, and I can understand why. I don't really understand what Falcon were doing with Victor in these games, and this will come back to one of those age-old criticisms levied against the series, the fact that many characters from Zero onwards just don't die. I personally think that Victor's death could have been huge in developing Laura. It would have been interesting to see how his daughter reacted and grew from losing the one closest to her, and we'll talk a bit more about that later on. But as for Victor himself, his screen time is fairly minimal, and for what moments he does get in game, he simply appears to be there to just prop up other characters when they overcome a man who is supposedly the strongest in the Empire. I will admit though, it was cool playing as him in that finale. I wish Falcon had the time and money to make some one-off DLC expansions for some characters. Gaius' Dominion training would have been a good pick and much needed for his character. I agree with the sentiment here, but forget DLC, make it part of the main story. The land of Arteria is something we know very little about, and having Gaius give us some glimpses into that state during his training would have been huge. It didn't have to be much, just enough to raise intrigue, and it would also have worked wonders in forming an attachment to Gaius himself. Unfortunately, despite his greater significance to the plot overall, I think Gaius just falls short yet again. His growth as a character is done completely off-screen. From the stigma manifestations we've seen before, they first appear at times when negative emotions are more prominent. It's a battle in of itself to not only release their energy, but to control them as well. Watching the struggles and trials that Gaius had to overcome firsthand would have done wonders for his character. But alas, it's simply given to us in reminiscent text form, and I think it just dilutes what should have been an epic moment when he finally returns. On to our first member of New Class 7, and it's one that I'm not surprised to see at the bottom considering the general quality of the others. He's not even a bad character, but it feels like that if he wasn't there, we wouldn't even notice. He was sometimes a good support for the rest of New Class 7, but overall felt kinda lackluster, especially in a class where every other member felt interesting and relevant to the story. The problem I had with Kurt is that even though he was a key part of the New Class 7 team, he was simply overshadowed by everyone else, and it comes down to two problems. Firstly, the doubts he has in his swordsmanship and his resulting thoughts of inferiority are mostly cleared up by the end of Chapter 1 in Cold Steel 3. It doesn't really get any time to develop or brew beyond this point, which is a shame because I think this could have been a great plot point. Sadly, beyond this chapter, a lot of this aspect is then relegated to bonding events. And secondly, in the other key area where Kurt is heavily involved, that being his relationship with Cedric, he seems to be overshadowed there as well. That scene before and after the final fight against Testarossa should have just been between Kurt and Cedric. No one else had to be involved. But I think his instructor pretty much stole his thunder here. He said the things that Kurt should have been saying himself. It would have given more satisfactory closure to his journey, and on top of that would have lended better to ending the animosity between Prince and Guardian. Another ranking, another badass father figure. But just like our previous daddy, Rutger doesn't fare much better, again due to lack of screen time. Up till Cold Steel 3, Rutger was hyped up quite significantly in the likes of the Crossbell arc and Cold Steel 1 and 2. He was the man who fought the fabled war god to a draw in a 3-day bout to the death, so there's no doubting his strength. And come Cold Steel 3, he's clearly got a lot of charisma about him as well. I personally really like his dialogue. It's crafty, but direct when it needs to be. But the problem with Rutger is that he was shoehorned into a role in Cold Steel 4. He was meant to be an awakener, and that is all he really amounts to. And it's a shame because that final talk with his adopted daughter before he passes on was great. It would have been excellent to see more of that type of moment firsthand. I'd still say that he's a decent character though. Time for the Icy Maiden. Now I'm gonna get some hate here, but I'm gonna say it. I don't care about Claire. I did not care one iota about her story. Now don't get me wrong, I think her role was important, that idea of being blindly loyal to your master. Claire is definitely not lacking in compassion. She is fully aware of the path Osborn and the Ironbloods are going down in order to end this curse that she has experienced firsthand. However, because of the nature of her character, which goes against the title she was given, she just can't handle the actions that must be taken. And that's good. It makes sense that not everyone can face adversity and overcome it. Some will inevitably be gripped by despair. But, despite my understanding of that, I still don't care, and it comes down to preference. Claire is a character who is very similar to another character in Cold Steel 4 who I think is eons better, or ions better. They have similar backgrounds, they both have a master that they idolise, but one chooses to follow while another chooses to rebel based on their own ideals. Take a guess which one I like more. As I've said, Claire's character makes sense, I appreciate that she is there, but I just could not feel invested in her because she pales in comparison to the other character who is much higher on the list. He's decent enough on the design and story significance side, but I personally am not a huge fan of how his character is handled. Maybe it's due to me having the wrong expectation, but he just came across as another lackey who couldn't live up to his own hype. This snippet pretty much explains everything that I feel about Lecter. This is a guy who has been around for a very long time, all the way back in Sky the Third. We've seen his antics, we've seen him outwit individuals and overcome sticky situations countless times, and that understandably made Lecter a fan favourite. He was a recurring individual that we wanted to see more of. But come the moment where he takes centre stage, it just kind of flops. We find out about his upbringing, we discover what he and the other Ironbloods are trying to do, but his role comes off as non-Lecter-like, if that makes sense. I don't expect a guy as confident and intelligent as him to simply bow down to fate, and that's because my expectations of his character were high from those previous games. Unlike Claire, who I didn't care about, this did leave a sour taste, but I'm hoping he gets a chance to redeem himself moving forward. And that is it guys, part 1 of the Cold Steel 3 and 4 community ranking is over. If you enjoyed it, please give it a like and subscribe if you haven't, as it really helps the channel. I'll see you for part 2.